Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From the analysis section, which stands imperative for the upcoming mains examination of 2026, we will discuss 2 important issues which has featured in the today's newspaper. The first and foremost is obviously the debate circling around the idea of right to protest and the social media protests and their socio-economic implications on society. Second, we will also discuss about an emerging debate in today's editorial, and that is, do young Indians really want families with the aspect of declining total fertility rate in our country? Then, in the mains value addition, we'll try to analyze the aspect of bulldozer justice, moving forward to the prelim section, where we'll take up 4 news, where we'll try to simplify the news for you and also provide you the much important value addition, so stay tuned. The recent protests led by Cockroach Janata Party demanding the resignation of Education Minister have actually rekindled the debate around the larger concept of right to protest in our country, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the 2 larger themes. The first is the salient features of the Constitution, an integral part of which is the fundamental right. And second is the issues which are arising from the government policies and interventions, in this case the lack of accountability and the misconduct of examinations by the Education Ministry. Okay? So, in this context, we'll first and foremost try to understand the fundamentals of the peaceful dissent in our country. What do we mean by the term dissent? It basically implies any kind of disagreement or basically standing in contradiction to the policies of the people who are in power, in this case the government authorities, the government bodies, etc. So, the Cockroach Janata Party protest have actually rekindled this constitutional debate on the delicate equilibrium which actually exists between the fundamental right to peaceful dissent and at the same time the state's obligation or the responsibility, which is also a constitutional responsibility, to actually preserve the public order. So again, does there exist a right to protest? That is something we'll try to decipher. And at the same point of a time, what is this reasonable restrictions which can be imposed upon such protest, right, which is actually being conducted by the public? Second is, remember that very recently, so there was a kind of a leader of a political party in the region of Uttarakhand. The party is called as Uttarakhand Parivartan Party. The chief of that was also moving to the Delhi to actually participate in this Jantar Mantar protest which is being conducted. However, he was apprehended by the Uttarakhand government and he was taken into the custody. The Uttarakhand High Court basically criticized this detention of Uttarakhand Parivartan Party's chief while travelling to Delhi to participate in the protest, specifically reprimanding them that how freedom to move freely throughout the territory of India is an integral fundamental right under Article 19 Clause D. So, what are the 6 important fundamental freedoms which are actually available under Article 19 of the Constitution? The first and foremost is basically the crux which basically forms the bedrock of this larger idea of right to protest, and that is freedom of speech and expression. What does this freedom of speech and expression basically entails? So first and foremost, it is available only to the citizen of the country. Remember this, right? There are such 5 fundamental rights which are only available to the citizens of the country. That is your Article 15, 16, 19, 29 and 30. So all these 6 fundamental freedoms are only available to the citizens of the country and cannot be availed by a foreigner. So the idea basically is that under this freedom of speech and expression, a citizen has the right to basically express their ideas or their opinions freely without any kind of threatening by the state authorities. And they can do that through any kind of, let's say, art forms, music, films, or in this case particularly the use of social media, where by using this right they can actually raise their voice against the grievances which they are facing at the hand of the state. Remember that an integral part of this freedom of speech and expression, as per the interpretation which was taken by the Supreme Court and not originally present in the Constitution, is also your freedom of press, where the press is actually required to report openly and freely without any fear of the people who are in the power, to report about what? Any kind of discrepancies which is actually prevailing in any kind of government initiative. So you people can recall that how there was a kind of a very brave report, investigative report, which was actually published in the Indian Express, which talked about the Madhya Pradesh chief minister, that how his immediate relatives has actually ended up buying a large chunk of land around some future projects which will be initiated by the government. So does this particular reporter who actually reported this issue is protected under the provisions of this freedom of speech and expression and freedom of press? The answer is absolutely yes. Then there is right to assemble peacefully and without arms. There are two keywords here. First is without arms. Second is to actually assemble peacefully. So as far as you people have basically gathered and you are raising your voice against the state, against any grievances which you people have faced, like for example the students of our country today, as far as you are assembling peacefully and you are not disrupting the public order, that basically forms a component of your fundamental right. Keep this in mind. Then you also have the right to form association. So let's say for example certain people came together and created this Cockroach Janata Party. It is indeed a fundamental right of theirs. At the same time, remember, such right to recognition of such an association is not a fundamental right. It's not like that the government has recognized this Cockroach Janata Party as an official spokesperson of the student. Second, you have the right to form unions, cooperative societies, etc. Similarly, as the constitution itself provides you the freedom to actually move freely throughout the territory of India. So let's say for example one fine day I actually ventured to the region of Bangalore and I decided that I am going to reside and settle there. Even that is considered as a fundamental right. Also, I have a freedom to practice any profession I want of my choice, to actually carry any occupation, trade or businesses. These are 6 fundamental rights which are available under the Article 19 of the Constitution. So the next follow-up question can be, does there exist a right to protest as well? Because here it has been written right to assemble peacefully and right to freedom of speech and expression. But explicitly, nowhere in the Constitution it has been mentioned that there exists a right to protest. So let's try to understand what has been the interpretation of the apex court of our country in this direction. The first and most important case is Kameshwar Prasad versus the state of Bihar. The issue was basically revolving around that how the Bihar government had completely prohibited the government servants from participating in any kind of demonstration. Like for example, many of you, or for example that includes me as well, we are very comfortably sitting in the confinement of our air-conditioned rooms and we are following all the updates which are taking place on social media. But we take a moral high ground that one day when we'll actually become the part of the administration, only then we are going to contribute significantly or take any specific action. So was the case with the government servants also, right? That whether they can actually raise their voice against their employer itself. Now let's see what apex court said. Apex court says that peaceful demonstrations are indeed a form of expression and assembly which is protected directly under the Article 19 of the Constitution. Second, violent demonstrations are not constitutionally protected. Keep this in mind. So, disruption of any such public order can be taken as excuse by the public authorities to actually kind of curtail or curb down the protest. Third is blanket prohibition, any kind of blanket prohibition by the public authorities on any such kind of a protest which is taking place. That ends up violating what? The fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. The second important case is the Himmat Lal Kesha versus Commissioner of Police of Ahmedabad, where police regulations virtually gave unrestricted power to refuse permission for any kind of public meeting on the public street. A kind of an action which you people can see recently taken by the government in Delhi also. The Supreme Court held that public street belongs to the public, right? As far as they are not intruding in anyone's private property. Why you can actually stop them, how you can stop them from any kind of peaceful assembly. Keep all of these issues in your mind, these interpretations of court in your mind, because when we will try to link that with the historical development, you people will be able to understand that why Supreme Court is taking such a stand. Second is that does citizen possess a constitutional right to hold meetings on public street? The answer is absolutely yes, under Article 19 of the Constitution itself. Very specifically in Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan versus Union of India, where the government restricted or prohibited the protest around the Jantar Mantar in Delhi, and they basically gave an excuse that, you know what, the residents around nearby, they are getting impacted and their fundamental right to actually reside peacefully is also getting impacted. Now let's say what was the interpretation of Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that right to protest is a fundamental right. Protest is a right as long as it does not break the peace. Responding to a petition seeking protection against the registration of criminal cases against those young people who are basically protesting naming of a newly operational international airport in Mumbai. Same was done in Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan case also. Supreme Court held that the state shall facilitate any such peaceful protest, but at the same point of a time, the rights of resident under Article 21 must also be protected. So let's say, for example, you cannot play some loud music there, or large-scale sloganeering beyond a certain time in the night is not, permitted, right? So that can actually hamper the peaceful sleep of the citizen, right, or the residents nearby. Thus, remember, public place cannot be occupied indefinitely. That has also been an interpretation which has been taken by the Supreme Court. Take it. So now when we have understood the idea of right to protest, let's try to look at the historical evolution of it. Keep one very simple thing in your mind, that our country's story of independence struggle is basically the story of right to protest itself. Where if you people are writing this issue in your ethics or in your GS2 paper, try to inculcate the quote of one of the greatest revolutionaries of our country, and that was Bhagat Singh, who wrote in the Two Young Political Workers in the year of 1931, in which the year also which basically marked the fateful demise of Bhagat Singh. He said, and I quote, "Merciless criticism of the people who are in the position of power and independent thinking of every patriot of a nation are the two necessary traits of revolutionary thinking." So in this context, let's try to analyze the backdrop of protest in our country. First and foremost, by such first nationwide movement which took place, and that was Swadeshi movement. So when Lord Curzon was appointed as the Viceroy in the year of 1899, and he was basically taking the ship crossing the Cape of Good Hope, he basically wrote to the Secretary of State at that point of a time, whose name was George Hamilton. Lord Curzon wrote to Hamilton, and I quote, that India is the most prized colony of the Britishers, and thus he said that his one and the foremost goal is going to be to basically bind India to the British crown for perpetuity. And thus, to curb down the rising wave of nationalism which was taking place at that point of a time, Curzon started taking some very stringent steps. One of them was obviously the partition of Bengal, which was basically done on religious and communal lines, against which a kind of a nationwide movement was launched, thanks to the Banaras session of 1905, which was presided by Gopal Krishna Gokhale, launching basically what the Swadeshi movement, where the citizens of the country came together and said that we are going to completely boycott the use of any foreign product. We will not pay you money for your products. We are going to use only indigenous goods, and thus kind of creating an economic pressure on the British government at that point of a time. Similarly, in the Calcutta session of 1906, where along with this resolution to boycott the foreign goods, there was also a very important resolution which was passed, and that was the demand of dominion status, where we said that from now onwards, the power to make laws for the people of our own country shall reside in our own hand, and thus kind of taking the first step towards the idea of democracy. The democracy which exists for the people, by the people, and for the goodwill of the people. That is the whole idea. Remember, it is also reflected in Article 38 of our Constitution, which is a directive principle of state policy, establishing our country as a welfare state. But what was the response of the British government at that point of a time? It took various repressive measures. Like, for example, to actually curb down the freedom of speech and expression, it brought at that point of a time Indian Newspaper Act of 1908. Or, for example, to actually curb down this public agitation which was taking place, they basically prohibited any kind of public meeting under the Indian Sedition Act of 1911. One of the major backdrop, right, which actually led to the kind of a demise of Swadeshi movement was that there was very less mass participation at that point of a time, specifically two classes of the masses, that is your labor class and the farmers were completely absent from the national movement. And that's what actually makes Gandhi one of the great political leaders of his time, because he basically brought the masses back to the forefront of this national movement. He brought the farmers through the Champaran Satyagraha of 1917, where he basically raised the issue which was being faced by the indigo planters under the Teen Kathia system. He raised the voice of the indigo planters who were basically coerced, right, by the planters at that point of a time. The farmers were coerced to actually grow indigo compulsorily on the 3 by 20th part of 1 bigha. When he started raising his voice, the district magistrate at that point of a time, right, of Motihari district, of which Champaran is a part of, the name of that person was W.B. Haycock. Haycock basically told Gandhi that you are basically violating a law. Leave Motihari as soon as possible. But Gandhi disobeyed to actually protest against the exploitation of the farmers and protested against the government initiative. Similarly, he also brought the laborers to the forefront of the national movement by raising their demand of 35% of bonus against the Textile Mill Association. And for that purpose, he basically went on the first hunger strike and thus kind of creating a template for the protesters to follow for the future. And a parallel can be drawn in this case with Mr. Sonam Wangchuk. Again, when it comes to the police brutality, many of you might have come across, right, the kind of repressive action which was taken by the policemen. They were also following the orders, right? But does such kind of heinous act committed against the small students, the young demographic dividend of country, can that be justified? A similar parallel here also can be drawn in with the annals of history, and that was the case of Jallianwala Bagh incident. The backdrop of that was the Rowlatt Act, which was actually brought by the British government in the year of 1990, which was nothing but the extension of the Defence of India Act 1950, where they said that any politically accused person can be arrested by the British government without any warrant. That person will be tried without any jury. And at the same time point of a time, does that person has any right to appeal? The answer is absolutely no. Gandhi basically turned this Rowlatt Act as a black act and launched a Satyagraha Sabha and called for a nationwide hartal on 6th of April 1990, which basically led to the arrest of some political leaders or local leaders from the region of Punjab, like for example Satyapal, Saifuddin Kichliu, etc. And thus a public meeting was called to protest against the indiscriminate action being taken by the British officials in the Jallianwala Bagh on the fateful day of 13th of April 1990, where Reginald Dyer, right, the general at that point of a time, closed the gates of Jallianwala Bagh and basically opened the fires on the innocent citizens, leading to the death of more than 1,000 people. Now remember this. Does this forms the parallel with the police brutality which is taking place today? The answer is an absolute yes. Also, who always be on the receiving end? The honest and the common man of the country, even almost 100 years back and even today. So when these ideas of right to peaceful assembly, the right of freedom of speech and political dissent, when it comes to the Constituent Assembly, in the front of those people who were fighting for the freedom from the British government itself, what was the discussion which ultimately led to the adoption of it under Article 19 of the Constitution? Very interesting aspect. So let's see the first debate. That was, should peaceful assembly be a fundamental right? B.R. Ambedkar, considered to be the father of our constitution, basically said that democracy cannot function without the citizen being able to gather publicly. Why? Because it actually enables the criticism of the government policies and thus enforces a mechanism of accountability of the government. Otherwise, the people in the power will do whatever they want. Then there was a counter argument which was taken by A.K. Iyer. He said that absolute freedom could actually threaten the public order itself, because public can go reckless. What if there are certain elements who actually have kind of some hidden agendas? Indeed, there is a possibility, even in this case also. Thus, state must retain the authority to regulate assemblies during emergency or riot, and thus kind of created a backdrop for the reasonable restrictions which you are going to read. Second was, should freedom of speech shall protect every kind of political dissent. Here came the biggest critique of the Constitution of India, and that was Somnath Lahiri. He said that you have provided so many exceptions to the freedom of speech and expression, something which you are going to read, right? That it basically will allow the government to suppress any kind of dissent. And thus he famously said, and I quote, rights were given with one hand, the fundamental rights, and they were taken away with another by the constitution makers. However, B.R. Ambedkar defended by saying that no country recognizes unrestricted free speech. So remember, there is no absolute freedom which you people have. There is always a reasonable freedom. So basically here our constitution makers were just acting nothing but a kind of a strict parent. And thus every democracy imposes what? Certain reasonable restrictions. What are the reasonable restrictions on the idea of right to protest? First is, let's talk about the speech and expression. So here Article 19 Clause 2 says that if any such speech is basically violating the sovereignty and integrity of India, or threatening the security of state, or basically compromising friendly relation with foreign state, then such speech and expression shall be curtailed. For this purpose, government has created various laws also. For example, time and again we have discussed about the Unlawful Activity Prevention Act of 1967. Or for example, if the speech which you are making is provocative in the nature and thus ends up disrupting the public order, decency or morality, or for example, you end up committing a contempt of court, right, where you basically, let's say for example, there is a sub judice matter and the court is handling that, and you basically question the integrity of the judges itself, or for example, defamation or incitement to an offense. So for example, very recently there was a very brave reporter and she was basically asking the minister about the issues regarding the ethanol, and she started saying the issues which is being faced by the normal public. The minister said that I am going to file a defamation case against you. Does he have the right within the constitution to file a defamation case? The answer is an absolute yes. Then comes Article 19(1)(b). What are the basic restrictions or reasonable restrictions which can actually end up curtailing the peaceful assembly how it was taking place? And for that there is sovereignty and integrity of India, as well as if you end up disrupting the public order. Now try to understand this. If let's say there was even one student who took a kind of a pepper spray and ended up spraying it on the government authorities or officials, can that be interpreted as a disruption of public order? The answer is absolute yes. Why? Because there lies ambiguity within the definition of the constitution itself. There is no such legal definition of what constitutes a public order, and thus it basically lies with the whims and fantasies of the people in the power. They can interpret it in the whichever they may want. Then Article 19(1) Clause C, the freedom of associations which you have, that can also be curtailed if you are basically kind of threatening sovereignty and integrity of India, or in any way disrupting the public order and morality. In this case, there was this very famous Shaheen Bagh case which took place, where the Supreme Court held that yes, indeed, anybody have the right to peaceful and lawful protest. That is indeed permissible within the law, within the provisions of the constitution, but that does not extend to coming on the streets and creating problems for the common man. Like for example, what if you are disrupting the national highway and thus you are basically, let's say for example, you are disrupting the movement of ambulance, and in that ambulance there is a person who is fighting for his life and death. The Supreme Court observed that democracy and dissent goes hand in hand, but the demonstration expressing such dissent have to be in designated places alone. ये clear है? Free, and thus the people or the residents there, they also have the right to live peacefully. They shall be have freedom from any kind of inconvenience, right to move freely, right to enjoy their everyday life, and that shall not be disrupted by any kind of public dissent which is taking place. Now try to understand this. When the government is saying that yes, indeed, we can impose reasonable restrictions, let's say for example, you disrupted the public order, or you basically, let's say, violated the morality, we are basically going to curb down this protest. There are still certain checks and balances which prevails under the Article 32 or the concept of judicial review. Let's try to understand them. The first and foremost is that any such restriction which is being imposed by the government, it shall come from a legal authority. So it shall have a sanction of a law behind it. Remember that. In the absence of law, the government cannot basically put any kind of arbitrary restriction on any of such freedom of speech and expression. Second, the restriction must pursue a legitimate constitutional objective. So in this case, let's say for example, if you were holding a national highway, take it, the government says that you are basically, let's say, disrupting the movement of transport and goods. Thus kind of essential logistics which was to be supplied here, that has been disrupted. Thus you are basically violating article 38 or the objective of welfare state of the constitution, right? And thus we are basically fulfilling this constitutional objective when we are putting restriction against you and removing you from this national highway. Then, let's say for example, if the government is giving this excuse in the court, there shall exist a rational nexus between the restriction and the objective which has been stated by the government in official channels. So for example, when they arrested Sonam Wangchuk, the excuse which was given by the Delhi High Court was that by the Delhi police was that there is a directive given to us by the Delhi High Court which specifically state that his health shall not be deteriorated up to a level. We were following the court order. Also, any such restriction shall have the least restrictive measure that should be preferred wherever possible. So the police cannot resort to a complete brutality, because remember, you are dealing with citizens and not, let's say for example, Naxals or let's say for example terrorists of the country. ठीक है, इतना clear है? Now remember that there exists a golden trinity of fundamental rights, and this golden trinity itself basically puts a lot of important restrictions on the government's arbitrary action to actually control such protest. What is this golden trinity? First is Article 14. Article 14 which basically provides for equality before law and equal protection of law, which basically ends up creating a doctrine of reasonable classification. Reasonable classification basically state that yes, indeed, the government can, let's say that provide for a lathi charge, okay, against some miscreants, right, who are creating a situation at such public protest. Such reasonable classification can be done by the government only on identification of such miscreants if they are disrupting public order, but that shall not be done on any other angle, let's say for example religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, etc. Then there comes your Article 19, that is doctrine of reasonableness. So let's say for example the government is saying that we are going to violate, kind of ban this freedom of speech and expression on a certain app. Okay. Can there be such blanket ban? The answer is absolutely no. You can directly go to the court. So now there can be two arguments. First is, let's say there was a person who was sitting on Twitter, traveling through a train, and the train was frequently getting delayed at various stations. So he basically ended up tagging the railway minister and said that, sir, please see what are the services you are providing to us. We have paid such a hefty ticket price for you. Take it. Can now the railway minister basically put a blanket ban on this freedom of speech and expression of this person by making this person's account basically block or something? The answer is no. Why? Because does the action really violate morality or public order? The answer is no. And this doctrine of reasonableness is an integral part of Article 19. Keep this in mind. However, there is another person who, let's say for example, is indulging in body shaming, or for example is making a provocative step, right, for let's say the separation of some territory from our country. Can this be considered as a violation of public order and morality? The answer is an absolute yes. So there exists a doctrine of reasonableness. Then comes Article 21, which basically provides for right to dignified life, under which there is an idea of due process of law and judicial review, which was basically introduced under the Maneka Gandhi case of 1978, where the Supreme Court held that it's not only, let's say for example, if something has been sanctioned by the law, that itself makes it, kind of a reasonable restriction. No. There will also be, kind of an analysis of the objective behind that restriction. So the due process of law shall also be non-violative of any kind of fundamental right, and thus restriction should be proportionate, not excessive or arbitrary in the nature. Keep this in mind. So when we have understood this entire idea of right to protest, let's just try to analyze another aspect which can appear in your social issues question, and that is the role of social media in, kind of instigating such large scale national movements or social movements. So from clicks to collective action. First and foremost is that social media has a large scale wide reach, from irrespective of the gender, irrespective of the age groups which exist in our country. All of us are basically glued to our mobile screen. Right now, more than 60% people actually use smartphones, right, and use large scale social media apps like, for example, Twitter. Also, more than 80% people actively use internet now. So there is a wider reach which has taken place because of the digitalization of our economy. And thus, let's say, for example, if an issue surfaces, a wide dissemination of information takes place, leading to what? Creation of a herd mentality, where each and everyone is basically talking about or is aware about the issue at the crux. Any such real-time dissemination of information basically starts creating a feeling of relative deprivation among you, where you are actually seeing a lot of people going to the protest and you feel the urge to join the protest. Why? Because of this feeling of missing out. At the same point of a time, the algorithm-based feeding of information which is done, it creates a kind of an echo chamber around you, where whole day you are just surrounded with the reels of the protest, news about the protest, which particular political leader is saying what, and thus your mind is continuously engrossed around the issue itself, which also ensures what? Large-scale mass mobilization. Keep this in mind. Also, because there is a kind of a continuous feedback mechanism which exists. So let's say, for example, there was a leader of this protest. He basically called for, the students to come protest, right, bear the wrath of the government, right, the lathi charge which was taking place. In the night, he was sitting in a comfortable restaurant eating burger. So that basically brought a huge criticism of that person, leading to what? The party basically disowned him altogether. So what takes place? Amplification and the shaping of narratives keep on taking place through the feedback mechanism which is possible through the large scale use of social media, thus understanding the nerve of the public, that what is the real demand of the public, or what is the amplitude of the intensity of the revolt, right, or the protest. Then the social media also act as a tool for fast and large-scale coordination among the activist and protester. And because there exists the vote-based politics in any democracy, because democracy is not for the people, but it is actually for the majority of the people, it creates pressure on the government, instant pressure. Government has to be responsive. Our Prime Minister basically held a meeting yesterday and gave a specific direction to make sure that no future paper leak shall take place. Ultimately, what are the issues which can actually take place around such social media driven protest? The first and foremost is slacktivism. Many of the time there exists a large scale online support for various issues, but at the grassroots level they only remain symbolic in the nature. For example, does these protests are also taking place simultaneously in tier 2, tier 3 cities and in rural areas? The answer is absolutely no, where there is actually much more need of reforms in education sector. Second, many of the time, because a lot of people start propagating their agenda, these social media campaigns, right, or the protests which takes place, they become a kind of a tool for misinformation and fake news to actually further polarize the society, dilute the value of fraternity and brotherhood under Article 51A. Also, algorithmic bias leads to creation of echo chamber, where you are basically feeded continuously with only one point narrative. You do not see the other side of the coin. Also, mismanagement of crowd can actually lead to the stampede-like issue, as it happened in the rally of Vijay. And state surveillance, excessive state surveillance, which will obviously follow to kind of make sure that no violation of public order is taking place, can actually hinder the idea of right to privacy, which has been recognized as a fundamental right under K.S. Puttaswamy case by the Supreme Court. Ultimately, how we can actually strengthen the concept of democratic dissent in our country? First and foremost, improve the digital literacy of the people. So more people can actually start using the power of social media. Start, kind of exposing the grassroots level corruption which is taking place. And we can do that through this digital Saksharta Abhiyan, Disha, to actually, tackle the issue of misinformation and fake news. There shall be a large scale fact-checking networks, as it has been done by the government, creating a Sahyog portal, right, under the Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Center. Also, there shall be an ethical platform for the governance, right, like for example, Digital Media Ethics Code 2023. So if there is any non-ethical thing which is being circulated within the, kind of a premise of such social media campaign, then the intermediary shall be directed to remove such particular content. Also, increase transparency from the government side. Right? If there is any issue, any loophole which is taking place, any misconduct which has been done by you, at least try to give that information to the public. जैसे अकबर ने अखबार दिया था, right, under Right to Information Act 2005. Ensure the accountability of public officials under Pragati platform and the Sparrow report. Make them accountable so that they actually kind of do their work diligently. Just try to attempt this question. Take a very probable question for this year. And just on the concluding note, remember one thing. Take the presenter of this particular segment does not support any political ideology or political party per se. The whole idea of this segment was, in the words of Dushyant Kumar, हंगामा खड़ा करना मेरा मकसद नहीं, मेरी कोशिश बस ये है कि सूरत बदलनी चाहिए, मेरे सीने में ना सही, तेरे सीने में सही, हो कहीं भी आग, बस आग जलनी चाहिए. A fire to reform, a fire to remember that one day when you people will become the bureaucrats and administrator, you will very clearly remember this idea of right to protest, and you will surely avail that. Moving on to the next news, where the editorial highlights the issue of declining total fertility rate among the Indians due to aspirations, anxieties, and the changing realities which is actually faced by the young Indians today. The issue which forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the larger theme of population and related issues. So what is the context of the news? The editorial today basically highlights that how we celebrate the World Population Day on 11th of July. And on that day, there was basically a survey called as Demographic Future Survey, which was basically released by the United Nations Population Association. According to which, there was basically a survey which was done of approximately 108,000 adults, and they were surveyed across 73 countries. Majority of them basically held this viewpoint, almost 4 out of 10 women and 3 out of 10 women, that having 2 children is basically an ideal family size. Majority of them also accepted that basically they are not turning away from the concept of family or so. They do not want to live their life in isolation. They have not reached to that pinnacle of individualism as well. Rather, they are actually trying to analyze whether the conditions actually exist to build such a sustainable family, where they are actually trying to analyze various parameters, like for example, their own socio-economic conditions as well. In this context, let's try to understand first the concept of India's demographic window, where as per the State of World Population Report of 2024, currently India's population is more than 142 crore people. Now keep this in mind that out of this 142 crore people, almost 68% of our country's population basically falls in the working age bracket of aged 15 to 64 years. And 65% of our population is currently below the age of 35 years, making our country one of the world's youngest major economy. So basically right now, let's say for example, there are people who are aged from age of 0 to 15, and then there are people who are basically above the age of 60 years, even if we consider this as an age of retirement. So around the people who are aged above the age of 60 years, that is approximately 10%. And in this particular age, 0 to 15 years, there is a kind of a population which is around 15 to 20%. So approximately 68% of population is actually the population which is keep on daily producing or contributing to the larger productivity or GDP of the country. So the population which is actually dependent on this earning population is very less, thus kind of creating a demographic window for our country. However, slowly our economy is actually going to age just like various other developed nations, and the concept of silver economy will emerge. Like for example, by the year of 2050, 18% of our population is going to be aged 60 or above, and thus going to act as a kind of a dependent population. Thus, this demographic dividend window which we have is available till the year of 2055 to 2056 and forms an integral component of our idea to become a developed nation or Viksit Bharat by the year of 2047. So now when we are talking about this young demographic dividend of our country, is that act as an asset? The answer is absolute yes. We do have a large scale labor force which is actually earning on daily basis. They are actually doing a majority of their savings, let's say for example, investing in the stock markets directly into the companies, or giving to the banks who are actually providing as a loan for various kind of entrepreneurship activities, and thus kind of acting as a major tool for the rapid economic growth of 6 to 7% of nominal GDP, which we are witnessing on daily basis. So a large scale population within the working age bracket actually have a large scale propensity to consume as well. Thus, our domestic demand till the year of 2047 is going to be up to the optimum or very high, and thus it will keep on generating an incentive for the companies to do for what? More and more industrialization, right? Creating what? More jobs, and thus there will always be a lower dependency ratio, at least till the year of 2055-56. This higher employment seeking population will obviously leads to what? Larger demand of product, leading to what? As an incentive to the industries to create industrialization, thus creating more jobs, and a vicious cycle of employment, propensity to consume and job creation can be done, leading to large scale industrialization and rapid urbanization. For example, as per the Niti Aayog data, by the year of 2047, let's say if there are total number of 100 people who will actually start living in urban cities, and they are not currently, almost 50% of them will come from India. These people who are much more technological based, right, shifting from the agriculture based economy or primary economy. You can see that how when we got independent, almost 75% of our population was dependent on agriculture. As per economic survey 2026, it has come down to 46%. Further, such technological savvy economy or industry 5.0, driven by the modern day tools of artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics, that is going to create what? A large scale crowding in effect by the government putting investment, by the private sector putting investment, leading to further innovations and the entrepreneurship. ठीक, कैसा लगा सपना, कैसा लगा ख्वाब? अब थोड़ा सा रियलिटी देख लेते हैं. How this demographic dividend can also act as a liability. What if this large scale working force is actually basically rendered jobless, and thus they do not significantly contribute to this large scale chain of productivity which we are discussing? And that is indeed a reality, the large scale ghost of unemployment. If we refer to the periodic labor force survey, the labor force participation rate was only 54%. So if there are 100 labor which is available, only 54 of them are actually actively participating in the production, and the unemployment rate is as high as 5.5%. Almost 6 of these people are not getting any jobs. Now try to understand this. As per the current weekly status, if there is a person who has even been employed for 1 hour in the last week, that person is counted as an employed person. After that, the unemployment rate is so high. Then thanks to the cyclical unemployment, which is caused by various kind of economic shocks, pandemic, West Asian crisis, etc., large scale imported inflation, the issue which we are facing, leading towards cyclical unemployment. Or for example, you people are great example of frictional unemployment in our country. Some of you might be a great engineer or a great doctor, and there is a very good job which is available for you in the market, but that is not meeting your aspiration, and thus you have kind of taken a sabbatical from the industry, from the productivity of the economy. Why? Because you have poverty of deprivation, and you feel relative deprivation as well. It's not that just because you have got a good education, or let's say for example you are educated, that directly translates into a good employment, because there exists a large scale industry required skill offered mismatch in our country as well. Because if you refer to the India skill report of 2025, almost 54% of the graduates, they were not employable in the industry. Only 46% of them were employable. Then even the people who are getting the job, many of them actually works in the informal sector without any social security net, because almost 90% of our economy is constituted by gig economy. They also face the issue of lack of nutritional security, the future demographic dividend of our country, the children's today. The issues like, for example, stunting and wasting. As per National Family Health Survey 6 data which has come for 23-25, almost 29% of the children below the age of 14 years are stunted. Almost 19% of them are wasted. So, if we do not take care of all of these issues, the same demographic dividend from an asset can actually transitions into a liability. Another emerging issue is that what if this demographic dividend which we have today, it starts declining and our population starts aging slowly, where the dependent population actually becomes much higher than the working population, an issue which is being faced by the countries like, for example, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Italy, etc. So to understand this concept of demographic winter, let's first try to understand what is total fertility rate. It is basically a standard demographic indicator to estimate the average number of children that a woman would have over her childbearing years, that is from 15 to 49 years as per the definition by World Health Organization, based on the current birth trend. ठीक? A total fertility rate of 2.1 is actually considered to be ideal because that is considered to be a replacement rate. Now, what is a replacement rate? It is basically the average number of children a woman needs to have so that population keep on exactly replacing itself, replicating itself from one generation to next without migration. And that is 2.1. So basically, if you are having two children, right, the population will keep on replacing itself and you will not require, let's say for example, migrant workers from other countries as it is being attracted by the European countries from our country. This 0.1 is actually, this 0.1 extra is considered. Why? Because there will be some mortality which will also take place, right, among the children, right, while giving birth or after birth, right. Let's say for example, if there is a non-institutional delivery which is taking place. Take it. India's current total fertility rate basically stands at 2.0 and thus remember it is actually less than the replacement rate as per sample registration system. Look here the countries with highest TFR: Niger, Chad, Somalia, Mali, South Sudan. Then there are some countries with lowest TFR, much lower than 2. The population is not even replacing itself. The people are getting much older and older. The young generation or demographic dividend is not being added to the economy. 0.8 in South Korea, 0.84 in Puerto Rico, 1 in Ukraine, 1 in Serbia. In India's case, it has almost come down to 2.0 right now. But the expectation is that if we keep on going like this, if the people keep on having less number of children, many of them are having, let's say, example, less than 2 children now, then it can come down to 1.04 by 2100. And if the population growth will slow down in the future, it will lead to the concept of demographic winter or rising silver economy, where we'll end up having more number of dependent population on the working one. Why this issue of declining total fertility rate is taking place? First and foremost, we'll try to understand the editorial's idea today, that how the young women, they are actually confused the choice which they have to make between the career and their family. Okay? Because obviously the entire concept of child rearing, taking responsibility of the children is automatically, lies upon the shoulder of the woman. Okay? Now try to understand this. Let's say I'm a woman. As per time use survey, right, published by the World Bank, women spends 5 hours per day on the unpaid domestic housework in comparison to the 30 minutes which is spent by the men. So I'm doing all the unpaid domestic work. I'm also taking care of the children. Does I am getting any kind of financial reward for that? The answer is no. So do I have any financial independence in the house? Again, the answer is no. Second, only 15 out of 100 women in our country currently have formal jobs. Most of them are actually employed in informal jobs, where the working hours, let's say for example, span for more than 10 to 12 hours. Do they have actually the strength to take care of the family, to cook for the in-laws, to take care of this man-child, as well as to also, let's say for example, take care of the children as well? In choosing between this kind of a future scenario, whether I would not try to focus actually upon my own financial independence by actually focusing on higher education so that I can secure a good job which can provide me a good livelihood. Because obviously, instead of, if I'm choosing this family, I will be apprehensive of a person who might try to sexually exploit me just because that person has paid my 300 rupees bill. Or for example, my parents would be required to actually, kind of pay a hefty amount of dowry for me, to actually, procure a sustainable groom for me, to stay with me for the life. The second side of the coin is that how the woman has actually become significantly empowered thanks to the various government initiatives. Like for example, there exists higher level of literacy thanks to Right to Education Act 2009 or Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. For example, if we look at the literacy rate in urban areas for women, that is approximately 82%. So these women, they have actually become much more informed about their rights, like for example, fundamental right. They have become aware about the Hadia judgment of Supreme Court, let's say. In Hadia judgment of Supreme Court basically held that right to marry to the person of your choice is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution, which also appeared in one of your prelims examination. Thus, these educated women are actually have much more sensitization to various, let's say for example, birth control mechanisms like contraceptive, the use of contraceptive, as well as to actually, kind of go for family planning on the basis of their socio-economic condition. Just look here how the contraceptive prevalence rate has increased from 54% to 67%. Take it. Just look here how Bihar has the highest percentage of illiterate women and the highest fertility rate in our country as well, 3.2. How Kerala has the lowest percentage of illiterate women and the third lowest TFR of 1.7 as well. Take it. At the same point of time, see earlier what used to happen, that the people used to keep on having child because their survival rate was very low. But now there is a improved maternal health care ecosystem which the government has created. Ayushman Bharat, Matra Vandana Yojana, Janani Suraksha Yojana, etc. So now if I am thinking that, like even if I will have one child, this child is going to survive for sure for a long period of time and has the higher life expectancy as well, I will not actually go to have multiple child. Why? Because then I will actually, note this down, will follow Gary Baker's quality quantity trade-off. These are the key social terms which people shall use in your answer. So this Gary Baker's quality quantity trade-off basically states that, let's say for example, now the people are actually substituting number of children to actually kind of use the same amount of money on one or two children so that they can be provided with good or high level of education, good health care, and thus a good meaningful livelihood shall be given to them. Further, the financial independence also brings a large-scale decision-making power for the women. That is actually showcased with their increasing female labor force participation rate that is almost up to 41% now. But when we look at these two arguments, it is very gender-specific, as if the whole concept of child or having a child or TFR is only associated with women. Now all the male members, male audience, now try to focus on this concept of economics of childbirth. Take it. At this stage, let's say for example, if you are facing a large scale unemployment, does anyone will come and choose to marry and live with you? Nahi. Then let's say for example, you got to the age of 30, 35 and you said, chalo theek hai, I give up, I am going to get married. But then you are facing relative deprivation thanks to social media, where you are seeing other people having such a luxurious house, luxurious car, such a great job, take it, and somehow luckily they have got good life partners also, take it. So you are waiting for that one right job, one right moment and one right person, which might never arrive. Then comes rising aspiration for high standard of living also, and that has also kind of inculcated into the change in the social values. So now like let's say for example, there is a rise of nuclear family which is taking place. Okay. In nuclear families, when the couples are living together and they are not being pressurized with the in-laws, right, and the immediate family members, so they can actually make much more independent choices. Thus, the kind of pro-natalist pressure on the young couples have actually declined. And that has led to what? Delays in the marriage as well as in the parenthood. Then, declining child marriage as well. One of the data today which has been given, that how women married before age of 18 years has actually come down to below 20% in 2025. There is also dilution of patriarchal norms because earlier only the male child used to be considered, because of the son meta syndrome, only the male child used to be considered as the harbinger of the next generation of the family, the person who is going to bring the pride to the family, or who is going to become the, the sole earning member of the person, right? The bread earner of the family. But now the women are actually kind of breaking that trend as well. Even in the fields like the sports of cricket, which was once only the male-dominated field, now we can see the women like Kranti Gaur, who can script history to actually become the first woman on the Lord's Test Honor Board. Hannah? One more important lesson which you can draw from this picture is that actually name your children very selectively. है ना? अगर क्रांति नाम रखोगे तो फिर क्रांति लेकर आएंगे. Thanks to also the sensitization which has been caused by the various use of media, like for example Dangal movie, which showcases the women wrestlers like for example Geeta Fogart actually winning kind of Commonwealth medal. है ना? तो हमारी छोरियां क्या बेटों से कम है? Also, the globalization and the phenomena of urbanization. So, for example, let's say if the large scale urbanization is taking place, high rents, large scale pollution, high cost of living, very expensive education and healthcare. All of this actually, kind of pressurize the parents to plan their family in a way that they can actually sustain the family. Thus, even leading to a rising concept which is called as double income, no kids families. Okay? So, does the craze of parenthood is declining among the people? The answer is an absolute yes. Today's article also says that how there is a large scale competitive environment. Just look at the large cost of expenditure which you are required to actually incur on the your future child's education. The large scale impact of climate change as well which they are actually going to face. And thus, these are the socio-economic implications of the declining total fertility rate in our country. The first and foremost is the demographic implication. The declining population can actually dent the entire concept of demographic dividend and shorten the window of growth for $30 trillion economy. Very recently, I was actually having a discussion with a student, and that student actually brought up a very innovative idea. That person said that, don't you think with this declining population in the future, there will also be less youth present to actually serve in the armies of our country, navies of our country? Don't you think that this declining TFR can also be detrimental to the idea of national security? And thus also to our, kind of act as a detrimental to the growth, economic growth of our country, where there will be a large scale burden of silver economy or a large scale population actually working upon the limited number of people who are actively contributing to the productivity. The regional imbalances will also be created. Why? Because of the labor shortages which will take place. Thus, less political participation for planned economy of states will follow. As well as if you look at the social implication, it will further fuel the concept of what? Nuclear family. Further, only child syndrome and the kind of helicopter parenting which we have also faced, where both the parents are actually working to, kind of bear down the exorbitant cost of raising the child. And the child is basically, kind of actually, having their upbringing in the kind of an isolated environment. A large scale loss of cohesive care and support system can take place. Increasing what? So let's say, for example, if the total fertility rate comes down to 1, and the concept of patriarchy, which cannot be diluted just by watching this lecture, obviously, it remains. Don't you think that it will further increase the concept of son-beta syndrome? Thus leading to what? Kind of a large-scale female infanticide and gender imbalance, and thus further declining sex ratio in our country. Further, delayed marriages and family formation will ultimately lead to increase of loneliness and isolation, leading to various kind of mental health impact, such as, for example, ADHD, which has become prominent among the youth these days. Just look at the data. 300 million elderly by the year of 2050, where India's elderly population is actually becoming the size of Mexico and Russia. An elderly population which will have a rising dependency ratio. They will actually, face the lack of job avenues thanks to the large-scale automation which will take place by 2050, thanks to the emergence of Industry 5.0. And thus, they will also face the same industry-required skill-offered mismatch. So what can be done to actually ensure the sustainability of the population? First and foremost, invest in the human capital. Provide the next generation free education. Sensitize them about the concept of family planning in the school itself. Do social engineering under National Education Policy 2020. Make sure that the population which is living right now is actually provided with a large-scale healthcare insurance system under Ayushman Bharat. Skill these population for the future challenges under, let's say, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Provide a comprehensive social security architecture. आपका आयुष्मान भारत हो गया, श्रम शक्ति नीति of 2025 हो गया. Create much more gender responsive demographic policy with the concepts of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao and Janani Suraksha Yojana, and balance regional development as well under Pradhan Mantri Gati Shakti and Divine, which is for the infrastructure development in the northeast area. For your conclusion formation, you can write the achievements of the SDGs. This is an innovative method to learn it. 3H, 4E, 5G. So if you are trying to take your argument towards the health, just write SDG 3, that is health, SDG 4, education, SDG 5, that is gender responsive schemes and initiatives. Also, how this sustainable population is an integral component of the idea of Viksit Bharat by 2047, and ultimately you can write that how we need a very comprehensive national level family planning initiative. Attempt this particular question and we move forward to the mains value addition section, where Allahabad High Court has basically delivered a kind of a split verdict when it comes to the concept of bulldozer action, which has become a kind of trending and in fashion by the various governments, where they actually want to showcase the public that how we are basically providing fast adjudication of cases, or for example justice on the spot, and obviously also showcases the kind of a distrust which people have now with the kind of a long-fetched, large judicial pendency and the court system of our country. So, the Allahabad High Court basically made a statement where it said that the court has limited power to issue additional safeguards against the state-led demolition of private properties if associated with people who are charged with the crimes. Take it. Now let's try to understand that what is this concept of bulldozer justice. It basically entails to the demolition of dwellings of the accused criminals. Take it, accused criminals, keep this in mind. It's not always in the case of convicted ones. Does there exist any statutory recognition which recognizes even this term? The answer is an absolute no. It basically works upon the concept of retributive justice theory, where the idea is that any person who commits the crime shall deserve punishment proportionate to the gravity of the offense which the person has committed. Okay? So let's say for example there is a person who has been accused of, let's say, violating the dignity of any individual, then that person shall also face the same repercussion in almost same fashion. But does it ends up violating the principle of natural justice? The answer is yes. Let's say for example, if I am accused of such a case and the government comes and the government is saying that we are going to demolish this private property or the house which you have built with the efforts of 20 years. What if I am an innocent person? Don't you think I shall at least have a court to hear my grievances? Right? At least my plea shall be considered by the government authorities. Thus, instant punishment without due judicial process ends up violating the concept of natural justice and the integral idea of right to equality under Article 14 and right to dignified life under Article 21 of the Constitution. So, what are the specific legal procedures or mechanisms which exist when it comes to the concept of bulldozer justice? First is Section 245 of Rajasthan Municipality Act 2009, according to which anyone who encroaches upon the public land can be punished up to 3 years in prison. The offenders shall be shown a cause notice, but there exists no provision for demolition of properties. Second, MP Municipality Act 1961, where there is a provision which says that the government is authorized to pull down the buildings which are constructed without the permission of city council by showing, let's say, show cause notice, and there exists a provision of appeal. In Section 27 of the UP Urban Planning and Development Act, the Tehsildar can basically pass an order for the demolition of illegal construction within 15 days of the order, and that shall not be questioned in any court if it is proven that the construction is illegal in the nature. However, Supreme Court time and again have taken the cognizance of this issue and said how can anybody's home be demolished only because he is an accused, and said that such a concept will lay down pan-India norms for due process, which has actually in the fashion, as you guys can see. Over 1.5 lakh homes has been razed and 7.38 lakh people have been left homeless in 2 years thanks to this concept of bulldozer justice. You can use this in your ethics paper as well, right, to actually showcase or use it in the case of lack of accountability or responsibility on the hand of the government. And we move forward to the prelim section, where we'll quickly try to learn about the new bill which is actually is going to be tabled in the monsoon session of the parliament. What is the context? There is an introduction of prevention of insults to National Honor Bill 2026. Which will ultimately end up granting the national song of our country, that is Vande Mataram, written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, the same statutory protection as of our national anthem. Currently, the Section 3 of Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act of 1971, it basically states that if you end up preventing the singing of national anthem, or you cause disturbance to any assembly which is indulged in the singing of national anthem, then that is basically considered as a criminal offense. Keep this in mind. Remember that under Article 51 Clause A of the Constitution, it is indeed a fundamental duty of us to respect our national flag and our national anthem. But does anywhere national song has been mentioned in the Constitution? The answer is no. Keep this in mind. Second, what if, let's say, the national anthem is taking place and I choose to be silent? Remember, in Bijoy Emanuel case 1986, the Supreme Court has held that right to remain silent during the national anthem is actually a protected right under Article 19, that is freedom of speech and expression, and Article 25, which basically provides you the freedom to profess, propagate and practice your religion. Okay? Now, what is the backdrop of this national song? The national song first appeared in a novel called as Anand Mat, which was written in Bengali, even though Vande Mataram has been written in Sanskrit by a person called as Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was basically working as a civil service aspirant, a civil service official in the British government. So remember that how we learn that through Indian Council Act of 1861. The examinations were conducted, and in 1863 Satyendranath Tagore ended up becoming the first Indian to eventually get into the civil services. From that year till 1885, keep this in mind, only 40 people actually attempted, 40 Indians attempted the paper of civil services, and only 10 of them eventually got selected in the span of 22 years. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was actually one of those 10 luminaries at that point of a time. He basically got a kind of an insider information that how the British government is actually planning to introduce the national song for our country, which was going to be Long Live the King, and thus kind of concluding the process of cultural colonization of our country. He took the cognizance of it, took a sabbatical, and wrote a book called as Anand Mat, where he basically put the idea of Sannyasi revolt, which took place in the year of 1770, as the first national revolt. And in that book included Vande Mataram as the national song and conceptualized the idea of Bharat Mata. He also wrote the first ever novel in Bengali called as Durgesh Nandini, and that's why he's also called as the Sahitya Samrat. Now, what is this Sannyasi revolt which forms the backdrop of Anand Mat? So you guys can recall that how after the, being victorious in the Battle of Buxar 1764, the Treaty of Allahabad was signed on 16th of August 1765, in which Britishers basically got the Diwani rights or right to collect revenue for the three regions, that was Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. And that's what they put efforts for the next 5 years to basically extract as much as they can from the Indian peasants. And they completely ignored the concept of irrigation, let's say for example focusing on the various kind of drainage networks, etc. Their sole idea was to extract or revenue exploitation of the Indians as much as possible. As the luck would have it, there also took place failure of monsoon. El Nino basically arrived for 2 years, leading to 70% of the rice crop lost and almost 10% of inflation in the food prices, which was already taking place in the market. At the same point of time, keep this in mind, that they basically increased the demand of taxes by 10%, because at the same point of a time, they were also fighting the first Anglo-Mysore war in the region of South. Take it. The tax collection system which they were applying at that point of a time was Ijradari, right? If any one of you can recall, Ijradari is a system where the tax collection right is given to basically that person who says that I am going to bring you the biggest amount of revenue. So the zamindars are also exploiting on the behalf of the Britishers. And even the APMC mandis or the Gomastas or the British agents at that point of a time, they started hoarding the grains, creating such a large scale shortage that approximately 1.2 million people perished, almost 1/5 of the Bengal. Thus, the sannyasis who used to travel at that point of a time, like for example Bhagwati Charan Pathak, even they were kind of imposed various kind of tolls. When they went to zamindars to ask for some little bit of respite or revenue, zamindars said that our zamindari has already been confiscated under Ijradari. We don't have money to give. The farmers were already facing the large scale famine. So thus these religious figures like Bhagwati Charan Pathak, erstwhile zamindars like Jugal Kishore and farmers, all of them basically raised the banner of revolt, and that became the Sannyasi revolt of Anand Mat. ठीक है. Also remember some specific things. These are the current directives regarding Vande Mataram, which will be played before Jan Gan Man when both are performed. It is going to be mandatory at arrival and departure of President, Governor and LG. And all 6 stanzas of Vande Mataram will be sung with a duration of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. The schools are going to begin the day with community singing, emphasizing on the mass singing at the cultural event. The issue was repeatedly in the news. There comes an article on 14th of December 2025, which basically states that what was the musical logic behind the Pradhan Mantri Nehru to actually choose Vande Mataram as the national song. Vande Mataram, which was actually sang for the first time in 1896 Calcutta session by Rabindranath Tagore, and that was presided by a person called as Rahimtullah Sayani. However, it was 1905 session in the region of Varanasi, being presided by Gopal Krishna Gokhale, where Sarla Devi Chaudharani sang it for the first time, and Congress adopted it as their first official song. Keep this in mind. Jan Gan Man was basically sang on 1911. Again, the session was in Calcutta as the luck would have it. And it was being presided by B.N. Dhar at that point of a time, and the singer was none other than Rabindranath Tagore, who sang it in Rag Bilawal. The Rag Bilawal, which appeared in this year's paper just 4 months down the line and has basically resemblance with Dheer Shankar Bharanam. That's how UPSC creates the questions for you. We move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about the Chabahar port. What is the context of the news? So US Secretary of War basically posted an image on social media where it showed that the maritime control tower at Iran's Chabahar port ended up collapsing after the US strike. And India has taken the cognizance of the issue and has basically stated that civilian infrastructure shall not be targeted during the conflict, following which convention? That is called as Geneva Convention. So currently at Chabahar port, there are 2 terminals, if you guys can see here. Okay. This is where we have basically created the Chabahar port. From Chabahar port, we have basically created a kind of an internal road which goes to a region called as Jahedan. From Jahedan, we have basically created kind of a Jahedan-Jaranj highway linking it with the Afghanistan. So through this, don't you think we can basically end up bypassing the region of Pakistan itself, go to Iran, crosses through this rail and kind of a highway route, reach to the region of Afghanistan, through which we can actually use to kind of trade our product with the Central Asia. That is the whole idea. Okay. So 2 terminals are there. Shahid Beheshti is the one which is controlled by us, and Shahid Kalantari is the one which is controlled by Iran. Remember, the same port is also mentioned as Kalewa Dimna in the Panchtantra written by Vishnu Sharma during the Gupta period time. So through the Delhi Declaration, joint declaration by Iran and India, the idea of development of Chabahar port was proposed, which basically act as nothing but the extension of this large-scale international north-south transport corridor, which starts from Mumbai in India, goes to Bandar Abbas port in Iran, goes to Baku in Azerbaijan, reaches to Moscow and St. Petersburg in Russia, and through that we can also connect with the Eastern Europe as well. Okay? That is the whole idea. Zaranj-Delaram highway connecting Afghanistan and the Central Asia, and thus countering this Gwadar port which is actually being developed by China so that it can get access to this Arabian Sea, the part of the string of pearls policy of China. What are the strategic importance? So first and foremost, you guys can recall that how USA pulled out from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and started putting sanction against Iran. Thus, under the sanctions, India was basically forced to zero down our oil imports from Iran, thus leading to the rise of Russian oil import, now constituting almost 1/3 of our total oil import. However, in 2024, we basically signed up a 10-year agreement, and in the budget of 2026, we basically allocated almost 400 crore rupees for the large-scale infrastructure project in the region of Chabahar, because it acts as an alternative trade route to Afghanistan bypassing the Pakistan's Gwadar port, and is the only oceanic port with direct access to Indian Ocean bypassing the congested strait, and that's why it is also important for Iran. Remember, the sea-land transit route from Chabahar allows India to bypass Pakistan and thus is viewed as an important part of the international north-south transport corridor, which is basically a multi-mode transport network connecting India with Iran, Russia, Europe and parts of Central Asia. The end of the US Chabahar waivers basically tilts the regional balance towards China and Pakistan. These are some other important ports which has been in the news. For example, Jebel Ali in UAE, Dammam and Ras Al Khair in Saudi Arabia, Haifa in Israel, Piraeus in Greece, Messina in Italy, Marseille in France. Keep them in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to learn about the concept of Association for Southeast Asian Nation, that is ASEAN. The context being that our country's External Affairs Minister is going to visit Manila, Philippines on July 22 to 23 to basically attend a Quad's foreign minister meeting within the framework of ASEAN. The Quad countries or the quadrilateral grouping, which consists of India, Australia, USA and Japan, and such meeting showcases India's deepening engagement with the Association for Southeast Asian Nation, basically being the extension of India's pragmatic Act East policy and countering China's dominance in the Indo-Pacific region, where there is a concept of 8-line. Can anybody of you in the comment section tell me what is this concept of 8-line which is actually applied by China in the region of Indo-Pacific? And what are the steps which is being taken by the India to actually counter that thing? So this Quad's finance ministers, foreign ministers, they have also launched Indo-Pacific Maritime Surveillance Cooperation as well as Indo-Pacific Energy Security Initiative to counter China. And is actually, the one of the tensions which remain is the perceived gap between India and USA persists. So for example, very recently there was a state visit by Donald Trump to China. USA is trying to extend hands with China now, putting tariff impositions on Indian products, destroying our civilian infrastructure at Chabahar. So what is the Association for Southeast Asian Nation? It was basically created through the Bangkok Declaration by the big 5 countries. The big 5 countries, let's say for being your Philippines, your Singapore, your at that point of a time there was your Thailand also. There was your Indonesia as well as Malaysia. So these were these 5 big countries. Adherence to the UN Charter for the promotion of regional cooperation and economic development. The first summit which took place at Bali, Indonesia, and the headquarters is also located at Jakarta, Indonesia. Keep this in mind. They have a GDP of approximately $13 trillion, which is almost 7% of world GDP. And together they act as the world's 4th largest economy by the year of 2030. For us, they are important because they act as a major gateway to the Pacific market. The Indo-Pacific market, which provides 65% of world's population and 60% of world GDP, kind of consisting 46% of world's merchandise trade and 55% of the container trade. Considering as they have a large population of more than 650 million population, they actually act as the world's 3rd largest market after China and India. Remember, some of these countries are also the largest investing countries in our country, the foreign direct investment. And the bilateral trade already crossed $130 billion in fiscal year of 24-25. Thus, to counter the balance dominating China and Indo-Pacific, India's Act East policy was initiated. Very recently, the 2025 was also declared as ASEAN India Year of Tourism, for which we have also committed $5 million. But the trade imbalance reveals, and there was a large scale kind of a free trade bloc which was being created through the regional comprehensive economic partnership with the ASEAN countries. The India was not the part of it. Another small question just to kind of instill a logical thinking in you people. Why do you think India actually kind of refrained from signing this regional comprehensive economic partnership with such an important bloc that is ASEAN? Were there some apprehensions? Can you people think about it? And we move forward to the last news of the day, where we'll quickly try to learn about the Index of Core Industries in India, which is published monthly by the Office of Economic Advisor under the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade under Ministry of Commerce, which, remember, used to earlier measure the performance of 8 core industries. So earlier, the highest weightage was given to refinery, followed by electricity, then steel and coal. That was RESC. Now remember that this thing has been reversed to ERSC, because now the highest weightage is given to the electricity sector, and the weightage of refinery has been reduced from 28 to 22%. Then it is followed by crude oil, natural gas, cement, fertilizer. right? So you can basically write ERSC, है ना, and then you can just learn कौन से fertilizer, ERSC को कौन से fertilizer चाहिए, ठीक है? It you consist almost 40% weight in the index of industrial production and does act as a leading indicator of industrial growth and productivity of economy. Now, what are the new updates? First and foremost, the base year has been changed now to 22-23, thus kind of bringing it par with the changes which has been made in GDP and CPI calculation. Chota sa question, what is the base year for nominal GDP and what is the base year for consumer price index? ठीक है? Second, a new ninth sector has been added, that is going to be iron ore. From now onward, the calculation of steel production will only be on the gross output and not on net output. Now when we are measuring the raw coal, we will only measure the raw coal and completely exclude middling and the washed coal. And through this revision which has taken place, the full year growth has been revised to only 1% when it comes to the core industries. Keep these arguments very dear to you in your mind, and with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.